Welcome to Team Trump Online.
In these days of great challenge, perilous times indeed, times that test the strength of laws and justice, let us rise up with greater purpose to determine the future for a greater America. The soul of faithful men and women historically contending for the very rights guaranteed by the founders of a great nation, inspiring all to rise above, to achieve the dream that truth and conditional love will have the final word, overcoming the bondage of slavery, only to be oppressed by another 100 years of racism, denying American citizens of the right to vote, creating disparities in income, housing, education, unjust criminal codes. We stand before our nation facing yet another crossroad, a path to be chosen by every American.
A question we must ask. As people of good conscience, do we bank on empty promises that heal our hearts a little, but insult our intelligence? Hear me. We are faced with a choice. A man who in 47 years of political service said one thing while doing just the opposite. A man who voted repeatedly against better education for minorities by opposing busing. A man who supported minimum mandatory sentencing, expanding the death penalty.
We must take back the streets.
The man who proudly stood at a ceremony of a law creating the largest prison population in the world.
Madam President, we have predators on our streets.
The man whose own running mate said his policies and actions are racist.
It was hurtful.
And has the audacity to tell African Americans that we are not black enough.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
We have checked the record. We can think for ourselves. The choice has never been so clear.
African Americans are joining the Republican Party. They love us and we love them.
President Donald Trump has done more for African Americans in less than 4 years than others have done in 40 years. It was President Trump, not his opponent, who eased sentences for nonviolent crimes, as well as reevaluating and overturning mandatory minimum sentences. It was President Trump, not his opponent, who signed an executive order to combat racial injustice and police brutality when the Democrats obstructed a vote on the bill. It was President Trump who delivered $255 million of permanent funding for historically black colleges and other minority-serving institutions, more than any other president in history.
We're fighting for school choice because all children have to have access to quality education, which really is civil rights.
It was President Trump who championed the most inclusive American economy ever and highest employment of the black community in history. 4 years, not 47 years, of record and results, not empty promises that sound great, but deliver nothing. Let us think for ourselves, not what we are told to think, and make an historic decision. In the words of my uncle, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we are not makers of history. We are made by history. Atlanta and all of America, rise. Let your vote be heard.
And now we're opening, and we're opening with a bang.
And today's announcement proves that our economy is roaring back. It's coming back extremely strong. The United States economy added almost 5 million jobs. Likewise, Hispanic employment is up by 1.5 million jobs. 3 million more women were employed in the month of June.
This is better than a V. This is a rocket ship.
The Bidens got rich, and America got robbed. That's the reality of the massive corruption scandal that intensifies as the despicable, dirty deals of the Biden cartel finally find the light of day. Joe Biden sold out our country, dangerous enemy of America, the Chinese Communist Party. In doing so, he totally betrayed American workers. That's why this story, this whole bribery scam revealed by the, quote, laptop from hell, is largely an economics story. I'm Steve Cortez, senior advisor to the Trump campaign, and this is MAGAnomics. Later in the show, we're going to have on some terrific guests, including Senator Marsha Blackburn and biotech entrepreneur Dr. Peter Drake. But first, we should delve into the damning details of the biggest scandal of Joe Biden's half-century Washington swamp career, as well as the biggest story by far of this entire campaign, even if the complicit corporate media wants to ignore this giant elephant in the room. And even if they find, unfortunately, willing assistance from tech giants using monopoly powers to try to suppress the story, the Americans recently become aware that Joe Biden is the head of a crime family, a Biden cartel that sold influence all over the world, including to the most dangerous enemies of the United States. Consider, for example, that Hunter Biden received millions of dollars from Moscow and from Beijing. Also consider, folks, that those two capitals, they control nuclear arsenals that have ICBMs in silos tonight, as we speak, that are aimed at American cities. This Biden cartel is not your standard grift. It's far more nefarious. In fact, it's totally disqualifying. Joe Biden can never be the president of the United States, and we can never risk a commander-in-chief who's compromised by the existential threat to America, the Chinese Communist Party. We also can never risk having a commander-in-chief willing to sell out American workers. And that's something Joe Biden has done with alarming efficacy for decades. In fact, perhaps the only accomplishment of Joe's half-century in the Washington swamp is facilitating the massive exporting of American jobs all over the world. He's been like an economic dirty bomb for U.S. manufacturing because his fingerprints are all over decades of terrible trade deals that prioritize the interests of multinational CEOs and foreign governments over the prerogatives and the prosperity of American workers. From NAFTA in the 90s to China's inclusion in the World Trade Organization and treatment as a most favored nation trading partner, Joe Biden's Senate and vice presidential career has been a massive win for the Davos crowd, but it's been a house of pain for places like Dayton. To put a number on it, according to the left-leaning Economic Policy Institute think tank, from China's entry into the WTO in 2001 until Donald Trump's election, our country lost a staggering 3.2 million manufacturing jobs to China, and an astounding 60,000 factories closed. Thankfully, that American carnage ended with the America First triumph of 2016. President Donald J. Trump puts Dayton before Davos. He knows he's the president of Pittsburgh, not Paris. But unlike President Trump, Joe Biden seems always willing to leap to the defense of our adversaries. For example, not only did he coddle and appease the CCP during his decades in power in both the Senate and the White House, but even recently, during this pandemic, he jumped at the chance to defend the evil Beijing regime. When President Trump smartly and boldly banned travel from plague-infected China in January, Joe Biden quickly called the decision, quote, xenophobic. Well, we have to wonder, given what we now know about Biden's shady dealing with the shadowy figures in China, if his acquiescence to Beijing was simply purchased by the CCP. After all, credible sources, including an on-the-record whistleblower, Tony Bobulinski, now affirm that Joe himself is the so-called big guy, cited in Hunter's email as a personal beneficiary of a 10% stake of a massive dirty money deal with a CCP-controlled Chinese energy mogul. The big guy was more than willing to sell American workers down the river to the communist Chinese. And the whole Biden cartel, they fed at the trough. The head of the cartel, Joe Biden, bears the ultimate responsibility. Hunter Biden, he's a sideshow. He's merely the bag man for this syndicate. The boss was and is Joe Biden. And only Joe Biden is on the ballot. So if you live in the industrial heartland, if your town or perhaps even your family had to endure a plant closure because of the unfair and predatory trade practices from China, then remember that Beijing Joe Biden paved the way for that misery. He was the best friend Beijing could ever have in Washington, D.C., and now we know that he had his hand out to do it. Disgusting. China's unfair and non-reciprocal trade practices brought carnage to entire industries, like furniture production in North Carolina, steel in Tennessee, autos in Michigan, and paper products in Wisconsin. We won't go back to those dark days of closed plants and limited opportunity. We won't retreat to a place of economic submission to China. The stakes are too high, and the recent progress is too exciting. Let's talk about some of that recent good news, actually great news. The deluge of data continues to roll in, and Patriots, it is simply amazing. I worked on Wall Street trading desks for 25 years. I watched economic numbers like a hawk for that whole time, and I have never, ever seen this kind of astounding data flow in on an almost daily basis. We know we still have work to do. Too many Americans are still anxious to get back to gainful employment. But we can also rightly recognize and celebrate the incredible recent momentum. It's not just a V-shaped recovery, it's a super V. The numbers don't lie. In recent days, two key stats give more evidence of the economic renaissance that flourishes across our land as we storm back from the China virus halt. First, sales of lightweight trucks just hit an all-time high in September at 2.6 million new vehicles. For light trucks, mainly pickups, this number means that we reclaimed all of the lockdown losses and then some. And this number, it's really key for two reasons. First, because of the high-paying factory jobs this revival in truck production represents. But second, on an ongoing, forward-looking basis, a pickup truck represents optimism and work because pickup trucks are used mainly for commerce, for the trades. Consequently, a burst in pickup truck sales means activity and optimism for the people out there who work with their minds and their hands. The deplorables, tradesmen, people in construction, landscaping, agriculture. This number reveals a country where it is truly morning in America. But the good news isn't contained to just autos, as the housing sector also soars recently in America. Just last week, we got new data out on housing starts and housing permits. Just hit a 13-year high, affirming earlier number of new home sales, which hit a monthly all-time record. The housing market in America rocks right now, and it's a terrific sign of burgeoning confidence in our future. Over 1.5 million new home permits were submitted in September. The only time our country saw a higher number was in 2007, and that number was a bit phony, built on the quicksand of leverage and liar loans during the artificial housing boom of 2006 and 07. This housing expansion, though, is real. It's based on legitimate lending standards, and it points to a really bright future for America. After all, permits are forward-looking. Houses, of course, take months or even years to build, so a surge in permits is very predictive of an extended economic expansion. The future looks bright. Actually, it looks blindingly bright. But we have to make the right choice. We need to rehire Donald Trump as our national CEO. If we do, I firmly believe that 2021 will unfold as a record-smashing year for the U.S. economy. Upward and onward. Our opponent, sadly, does not believe in our potential. Joe Biden is, in fact, a purveyor of panic. He foments irrational fear, and he warned during the debate of a, quote, dark winter. We can't and we won't accept that defeatism, that diminishing nihilism of the left. No dark winter looms. President Trump and this campaign encourage you to embrace the reality that it is morning in America. Up next, Senator Marsha Blackburn.
We want to see China rise, to continue to rise in a responsible way.
After Joe Biden takes a pretty soft position towards the Chinese, Hunter Biden inks what becomes a $1.5 billion with a B dollar deal.
His son Hunter there and in China profiting off his debt. There's no question that he did it. You wouldn't have signed him onto a major energy company in Ukraine unless his last name was Biden.
Hunter Biden was reportedly kicked out of the Navy Reserve after he failed a drug test.
He spent extravagantly on drugs, alcohol, prostitutes, strip clubs.
There are 5 Biden family members who cashed in while he was vice president.
The Chinese have a long-standing practice of extending deals to family members in exchange for favorable treatment from foreign leaders. Biden recognized this.
Growth in China is overwhelmingly in our interest.
China would prefer Joe Biden. That's their conclusion, that they would prefer Joe Biden.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Darling, somebody just moved next door. Who is it? It's a representative of Antifa. She will look at her husband and say, darling, we're out of here. Remember, they were trying to blame other people. They don't like to mention the name Antifa. I said it's Antifa, and I was right. I was right. They're bad people. And you know what? They have to pay a price for the damage and for the horror that they've caused. They have to pay a price. A lot of them now are wealthy. You know, they're like these wealthy, spoiled kids that have no clue about life. They've got arms that are about this big, but they wear heavy jackets. And you look, you say, oh, that guy looks tough. And then the jacket comes off, and you see these two little. Then they go home, and they live in a basement, too, their mom and dad's basement.
Welcome back. I'm Steve Cortez, and my first guest tonight is Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Senator, I noted in my opening statements the very dour outlook expressed by Joe Biden in the debates last week. It seems to me that he represents a really dismal view of America, particularly economically speaking. I think he stokes irrational fear. He warns of a, quote, dark winter. In contrast, President Trump, he's encouraging America. He's inspiring our citizens. He's describing how it truly is morning in America, not the dark winter, and especially economically. Your thoughts, Senator?
Oh, I have to tell you, you are so right. In President Donald Trump, we have an optimist, somebody who is a political outsider. But here is the big difference. He believes in the American people, and he trusts the American people to make the best decisions for themselves, their families, their businesses. On the other hand, with Joe Biden, you have an insider, a Washington, D.C. veteran insider who is a pessimist. Right. He is someone who repeatedly says he believes in big government. He believes in the bureaucracy. Give them the power, give them your freedoms. They'll give back to you what they think you can manage. He doesn't really trust the American people to make those decisions. One of the things that has become so apparent is that President Trump wants to get this economy open, get people back to work, children back to school, and he trusts our communities to do that. Joe Biden has said he is going to continue the lockdowns, right, and believes that that's how you deal with the situations that we have with the virus, with the economy. You lock it all down again. And Steve, I talked to a lady last week who actually changed her vote because she felt like Trump trusts her and Biden trusts the government.
Right. No, isn't it fascinating, Senator, that even though he's the incumbent president of the United States, he is very much still the outsider running against the Washington insider, the swamp dinosaur who's been in Washington, D.C. for almost a half century. I want to ask you, Senator, though, about that issue of, pessimism and the lockdowns, because a lot of lockdown governors and mayors, they unfortunately believe what Joe Biden believes. And in a lot of blue states, they don't trust the citizens and businesses to take sensible approaches to managing the China virus. But your state, thankfully, Tennessee, has been pretty intentional about reopening, doing it smartly and safely, but also doing it swiftly. So, how would you assess that contrast and what it means for the economy in a place like Tennessee versus some of the lockdown states?
Yeah, Steve, we've looked at this quite a bit, and Governor Bill Lee has done a very good job managing through this. Like President Trump, he is a political outsider, a businessman who came to the governorship as his first elected office. Now, what he has done is to work very closely with our county and city mayors, and he has trusted them by saying, we will get to you the resources. You do what is going to work best for your counties. And as we have completed our 95 county virtual tour, we have heard from county after county that their sales tax revenues are up, their we're hiring signs are out, their building permits are up. And the reason for this is companies have gotten back to work. They're doing it safely. They're using PPE. And we are seeing people choose to vote with their feet and move from blue states and blue cities into Tennessee, where they have more freedom and where life is getting back to normal. I think the only city in Tennessee that didn't have a great start was Nashville, and they had a pandemic advisory council that was advising the mayor to keep everything in lockdown, and they have suffered because of that.
Right. To that point, Senator, so I live in Chicago, and I can't tell you how many Chicagoans have moved to Tennessee. There's just an exodus of Illinoisans, that point of voting with their feet and going to freedom states. They're going to South Carolina, Tennessee, but places like Texas. It's really incredible. And I'm speaking to you tonight from Trump campaign headquarters, which is in Arlington, Virginia. And it's so different to be here in the capital region. When I then get out on the campaign trail and get into America, it's like night and day, because D.C. is still very locked down, very, very restricted, not many people around. And then when we go to places that are open, it's a whole different America. And it's refreshing, quite frankly, to see, I call them the liberty states, places like Tennessee, and the activity out there. But I want to ask you, let's get back to the national level, Senator, because the economy, of course, so important. And that's the focus of this show, MAGAnomics. 56% of Americans in recent Gallup polls say they are better off now than they were 4 years ago, even with all the challenges of the pandemic, even with the lockdown states. That 56% level, by the way, that is by far the highest for any incumbent president. And they've been polling this Gallup all the way back to 1984. Of course, Ronald Reagan largely won with that slogan of "Are you better off?" in 1980. So from 84 on, they've always polled on this number. No president has ever gotten higher previously than 50. That was the high of Bill Clinton in 1996 when the economy was quite strong. So 56 is a substantial number put in historical context. Do you believe that poll number and what it represents, the opinion of the American people about the economy, do you think it points to a Trump win on November 3rd?
I do think it points to a Trump win. And when you look at the Gallup poll, Steve, I think you also have to couple with it the Cato Institute poll, which showed that 62% of all American adults are fearful of giving their opinion on politics right now. Right. They don't want to hurt their careers. They don't want to hurt their jobs. They don't want to hurt their children. And so they're keeping their mouth shut. And you mentioned the Gallup poll. I thought the telltale number in that poll was they wouldn't answer who they're voting for, but when you say who is your neighbor voting for, you had 55% say Donald Trump.
Right.
Here's the thing. People know that their wallet got a little bit fatter, life was a little easier, and they know that Trump is going to trust them to get the economy going again. And what do they want? They want those wage gains. They want more hours that they can work every week.
No, absolutely. It's we here at the campaign pay a lot of attention to that poll number of who do you think is going to win or who are your neighbors voting for, and we've consistently been on top there. We meaning Donald Trump, President Trump, and we do believe that that is a way. It's a stealth or sly way of asking people who are you actually voting for if you felt you had full permission, and that's a shame, by the way. We've got to change that in our society. This pernicious cancel culture. I think it's just a cancer on American society. We've got to change that. It's one of the things we can do in a second Trump term. But listen, I also want to ask you, Senator, that 56%, that majority better off number, it flows in large part, and I think you touched on this, to the incredibly strong economic momentum that we had coming into the China virus. So while what happened to our country is incredibly unfortunate, totally unwelcome, of course, it's not Donald Trump's fault, it's not the Democrats' fault, it's only the fault of the Chinese Communist Party. But thankfully, we came into that virus and that shutdown with a massive amount of momentum because 2019 was the single best year for income growth in all of U.S. history by a mile, actually, 6.8% overall wage growth. So we came into this situation, thankfully, with a lot of economic strength. So I want to ask you, Senator, would you credit those 2019 stellar numbers, would you credit the 2017 tax relief that you passed and President Trump signed, would you credit that for the acceleration that we then saw into 2018 and 2019?
Absolutely. You look at the Tax Cut and Jobs Act and everything that went into that. And yes, we had the lowest poverty rates for every demographic breakout that they poll. Lowest poverty rates. We had the highest wage gain. Think about it. On average, the average family had a $4,400 plus up in their household income.
Right.
Couple that with your tax cuts, couple that with the labor force participation rate. Not only you were working, but your neighbors were working. Your children had jobs. So this was a very solid footing. And yes, our nation is blessed that we were firmly positioned when the coronavirus hit. And I think that this is something people want to return to. And they know that President Trump pulled them out of the long recession that we had all 8 years of President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden's term. And by the way, Steve, I tell you, I think it is absolutely phenomenal that Joe Biden boasts about having led the Obama recovery.
Right.
I don't know of many people that look at that and see it as a recovery.
Right.
And they credit President Trump
No,
with getting this economy turned around.
I concur. We here at the campaign are very happy when he tries to brag about that economy because, and here's where I think he's so disconnected. It was a great economy for the already very successful. If you owned a lot of assets, stocks and real estate, those were great years for you. But for wage earners, which is the vast majority of people in this country, they weren't good. I think that's part of their disconnect. They don't realize, within their world, they're a sell a corridor world. They think those were salad days, but they were tough days for American workers. Yes. And then that reversed. Of course, everyone did well in the Trump years, including the wealthy, but the workers, they moved to the lead. They lead to the front of the income gain. So, Senator, I know how busy you are. So just one last question. What would be your closing argument as we head into this final week for women? What would you tell women to convince them that President Trump has earned their votes?
One of the things that women need to look at is what the president has done with the federal bench, with judges, and making certain that our judicial system is there, having constitutional judges on the bench that are not going to pick winners and losers. That is so good for women who are in the workplace. It is good for women when they think about keeping freedom in this country and opportunities for their children. They also need to look at the economy, the growth, the way college students coming out of college were getting jobs with President Trump, the way President Trump put an emphasis on workforce development, jobs retraining, skills training for skilled labor. As you said, that is one of the reasons that there was such an uptick in the wage rates, because plumbers, electricians, welders, all of these skilled labor positions, you were seeing such growth there. So women need to think about that. They need to think about the policies of taxation and regulatory relief and look at how that spurs innovation and job creation. And for future generations, for their children, for their grandchildren, for wage and job growth, this is what is going to make a difference and provide a better life for each and every American. As I said, you've got one candidate, the president, who believes in the American people and trusts them to make decisions, and Joe Biden, who believes in big government and thinks you should trust government.
Right. Well, that's a compelling argument, Senator. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight.
Delighted to join you. Thank you.
You bet. Patriots, we'll be right back.
What I call the basket of deplorables.
Those chumps out there with a microphone are doing the Trump guy.
Anyone who supports this is supporting racism.
Our next guest is Dr. Peter Drake of Nevada. He has an extensive career in the healthcare field. He's an entrepreneur and a biotech investor. He has a PhD in neurobiology and biochemistry. And given his combination of scientific as well as financial acumen, I think he can speak with a lot of insight for our audience. Dr. Drake, welcome to MAGAnomics.
Thank you, Steve. Good to see you.
So, Peter, before we hear about your story, which we definitely do, your personal story and your career, can you first share with us your insight about the president's handling of the virus? Because as a scientist, I want to hear your assessment of his crisis management and the real record of President Trump in confronting this challenge of the virus.
Well, you know, to be sure, Steve, the early phase of the infection was marked by what I would call misinformation and disinformation. By setting up the coronavirus task force under Vice President Pence, the president provided an interdepartmental structure and a private-public organization to the response that frankly hasn't been seen in government since FDR during World War II.
Okay, no, that's outstanding. And by the way, we haven't seen the kind of government mandated manufacturing effort in this country that we saw in this 2020 since World War II. So that's also an apt comparison. So, Doctor, I also want to ask you, from your scientific point of view, if you can enlighten the audience about the progress that is being made in treatments out there right now, and then perhaps of vaccines. So from your perspective, how much progress has been made in treating the sick, and what's the prognosis looking forward from here?
A great question. And let me put it, I'll start with vaccines and then put that into perspective and then go to therapeutics. So Operation Warp Speed, in my opinion, has been a huge success. Regarding vaccines, it is particularly remarkable, okay? In my investment career, we've never allocated funds to a vaccine company or to a vaccine technology. It's historically been too risky, okay? It takes 10 to 12 years to develop a vaccine. To put it into perspective, the Salk polio vaccine took 10 years to develop. Gardasil, a product to prevent cervical cancer in women, took 15 years. The fact that we did not know the sequence of the COVID virus until February, and the fact that we are on the threshold of an approval is nothing short of a miracle, in my opinion. Had you asked me in January or February when it would happen, I'd have said if they fast track it like crazy, maybe 5 years.
Wow. And we're talking within a year, potentially.
and we're talking within a year, which is just speaks to that private public partnership. And it also speaks to something that the Wall Street Journal wrote about this weekend in the weekend edition, which is the private sector, the pharma companies are sharing information in a way that they never have ever in the history of drug development. Now, on the therapeutic side, there's been remarkable progress. Remdesivir from Gilead was approved just earlier this month. There are monoclonal antibodies in advanced clinical testing. As we know, the president received the Regeneron product. Eli Lilly has a product. The area of therapeutics is burgeoning, and the efficacy data has just been from what I've seen in reported clinicals has been really quite remarkable.
Right. No, it's fantastic. I mean, obviously, the whole country saw how quickly our president rebounded. Thankfully, that story's not unique. You know, even people who do get sick enough to get hospitalized, our track record of treatment is so much better today than it was months ago in some cases.
Well, again, there's an evolution in the treatment of any disease, right? And so we've gone from the virus killing mostly elderly people with comorbidities, that being obesity and diabetes, to something now where the overall approval and survival rate is 99+%. Right. So it's really been quite remarkable. And I don't think that the public really appreciates just how incredible this is.
Well, and the president talks about that, and he, in his own assessment, he says, I give our administration an A in terms of crisis management, but unfortunately a much lower grade in terms of messaging on it. So it's incumbent on us in these closing days of the election to do the best we can to get the real story out there. And that's why I wanted to have you as a guest today, Peter, because of your scientific credentials. I knew you could speak, both your scientific credentials as well as your support for the president. You know, you could speak with authority on this. So I want to ask you about your personal background. We always like to highlight entrepreneurs, doers and dreamers out there, and that's part of what this show does, because I think that the job creators are the unsung heroes of American society, but they're not unsung on this show on MAGAnomics. So, Peter, were you always science oriented? And if you would share with the audience, you know, your career journey. How did you decide to get a doctorate, and then how did you decide to meld that STEM background with finance?
Well, thanks. I grew up in St. Louis and was always interested in science, and therefore my parents, when I was 13 years old, said, well, what are you going to do? You need to get a job. And I volunteered at a hospital for a year. And then that gave me an entree to getting a job at 14, which I kept until I was graduated from college at 22, in a surgical research lab at St. John's Mercy Medical Center. So it was that had been a passion of mine. I went to college, obviously, majored in biology and Russian, went to graduate school. And as I was writing my dissertation, and I think you'd find this common among a lot of entrepreneurs, I, at that time, wrote a letter, handwritten, to the chairman of Monsanto. I grew up in St. Louis, so I was aware of who he was, didn't know him, but I cold wrote him a letter and said I had this view of an emerging technology industry. We now call it biotech, because this was in 1980 that I wrote this letter. He invited me to St. Louis. He spent the day with me. And at the end of the day, he said, you know, what you ought to do is go do your postdoc, which I had already been hired to do, go to business school, and go to Wall Street. And it was like a neon sign. And I did that. I went to Wharton and then went to Wall Street and was the first biotech analyst on Wall Street.
Wow. You know, hearing your academic credentials, Peter, makes me feel a little dumb. I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, the Wharton MBA, the PhD, and not just any PhD in neurobiology and biochemistry. You've been working hard for a long time. It's fantastic, though. But that's why I wanted you on the show. You've
been a great run. It's been a great run.
So listen, I also do want to ask you about that entrepreneurial aspect, because you found a lot of success first working for large firms, but then you also started your own. And as a business founder, what do you think, Peter, what has Donald Trump done to create the conditions for startups to thrive in America?
Well, it wouldn't surprise you that as an entrepreneur, one would focus on regulation. So I'm reminded when thinking about a regulation by an article that Andy Pudzer, who was the CEO of CKE Restaurants.
Right. By the way, a guest on this show. Go ahead, Peter. But
amazing guy. I mean, yeah. If he writes an op-ed, if Larry Lindsay writes an op-ed, I read them all. I read them all. So what Andy wrote about 3+ years ago was an article entitled "Where We're Going to Grow," and it described how they had grown all their business primarily in California, and the new business licensing took 288 days in California and took 44 in Texas. Where are we growing? We're growing in Texas. Okay. So I really think regulation for me is 1, 2, and 3. And if you look at the growth in GDP in 2017, before the implementation of the tax cuts, which didn't take place until April of 2018, all of that GDP expansion that happened in 2017 happened because of a decrease in regulation. Sure. So I think regulation 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so listen, Peter, last question. What do you see as the strongest reason, the best closing argument as we enter the final stretch here to win voters over for President Trump in these closing days?
I think it's pretty simple. You know, when James Madison personally wrote the Bill of Rights in 1790, when he wrote the 5 First Amendment rights that we all have, he was well aware of pandemics in the world. Our First Amendment rights did not come with a comma unless there's a pandemic.
Right.
Okay? In particular, the right of peaceful assembly. Mm-hmm. This president, unlike his opponent, is going to support our First Amendment rights. He's going to support our Second Amendment rights in a way that Joe Biden and Senator Harris can't even imagine.
Right.
They live in an altered world when it comes to First Amendment rights.
Peter, that's inspiring, and it's an important reason to vote for this president. Peter, thank you for everything you do for this president, and thank you so much for being our guest tonight.
Thanks, Steve. Have a great day.
You bet. Folks, we'll be right back.
Joe Biden has proposed raising taxes by trillions of dollars and is partnering with self-described socialist Bernie Sanders on policy. Joe Biden is pledging to spend trillions of your dollars on the job-killing Green New Deal. Joe Biden supports amnesty for illegal immigrants and sanctuary cities. Joe Biden has turned his back on law enforcement and supports redirecting funds away from the police. And Joe Biden didn't even have the courage to condemn the anarchists rioting in American cities during his own DNC convention. Joe Biden, radical, corrupt, extreme, and dangerous. Donald Trump is fighting for law and order and the safety of every American citizen. On November 3rd, your family's safety is on the ballot. Joe Biden is a 47-year swamp creature that has accomplished nothing. And President Donald Trump is fighting to keep every American safe and secure. Vote Donald Trump 2020 for you and your family's safety and security.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
But they're going to destroy the suburbs. You know, I keep hearing about suburban women like you, right? Suburban women. Well, you live in a beautiful house, right? It's everything perfect, the American dream, right? Do you mind having a project built next door? Yeah, she said she minds. You know who minds? Everybody minds. And they're going to change the zoning that allows them to build projects in the suburbs. So the guys came to me, sir, we're all set. We're going to really bring it back. I said, no, I didn't say bring it back. I said, I want it ended. Well, that's not so easy. I said, I want it ended. I don't want it. I don't want it.
We need your help to defend our great country against Joe Biden and the radical Democrats. The stakes couldn't be any higher this November. So we need all the patriots at home watching right now to join in our fight to re-elect President Donald J. Trump. Here's how you can get involved. First, you can download the new groundbreaking Trump 2020 app. It's available on Apple and Android. To stay in contact with us, please text Trump to 88022. If you, your friends, family, neighbors, anybody wants to get involved in the fight to re-elect President Donald J. Trump, please visit armyfortrump.com to sign up. Please follow me on social media. On Twitter, I'm at Cortez Steve, Cortez with an S. We want to thank our amazing guests tonight, Senator Marsha Blackburn and Dr. Peter Drake. Special thank you to all of the amazing supporters watching at home as well. We'll see you again next time on MAGAnomics.
To talk about the fact of what happened in World War II. Veterans normally don't talk about the war because it brings back terrible memories of what they went through. My name is Irving Locker. I'm 96 years old. I was born and raised in Passaic, New Jersey. I'm married for 72 years to the same beautiful lady. I was drafted in 1943. The unit I was attached to was the 116th AAA Gun Battalion, anti-aircraft, anti-tank, and artillery. And I was there on D-Day, and because I was there, I was awarded the French Legion of Honor by the French government for the amount of work that we did. We liberated a Holocaust camp called Gardelegen, the worst experience of my life. Once the Americans got close to the Gardelegen, the guards were afraid that the victims would be able to identify them. So they put them into a barn, put hay and straw on the floor, put gasoline on there, and locked them in, and then lit the hay and straw and burned them to death. And when I got there, when I saw what they did to those people, basically, first I threw up, then I sat down and cried. As man's inhumanity to man, and what did they gain from doing that? If we lost the war, we'd be talking Japanese or German. Of course, I wouldn't be here because I'm Jewish, and that would have been the end of my life. And people in the United States, everybody was aware of the fact that we were there fighting a war and giving our lives to do that. But today's generation have no idea what we went through during the war because they're not taught. People have to understand that. The people who gave their lives so that we could be free is the biggest thing in the world that our kids do not know anything about. I went back to Normandy, and there were children in Normandy wearing red T-shirts. I am a child of freedom, mercy, dear veteran. So the children there are taught of what the veterans did and how they lived and what they gave up in order to make them free. You never hear that in the United States at all. They're not teaching history to that point. They're not teaching about World War II. I was there. I lived during those times. If they don't talk about it, and if they're not in history, how are they ever going to learn what the sacrifice? They don't even know what the word sacrifice means. The people who were there, they sacrificed everything at that particular time. That's why I talk about the fact of wearing this red T-shirt of the children, that Americans should be wearing the same T-shirt, basically, for the veteran. I'm very fortunate because I wear this hat, I wear this cap every day, and people recognize and thank me for my service. So when I'm thanked for my service, I say to them, I appreciate it very, very much. I have this book, a complete chronological order of every single day of the war. So whatever I talk about is in that book, and it can be proven, so that I'm not just talking to hear myself talk. When I go to these different places and talk about it, people are amazed. People are amazed. When I talk about things like that, I mean it sincerely. I talk about it from the heart.
And that's why I do it. I do this, believe me, I don't charge 1 penny. When I go out and talk or drag all of this stuff around, it's my way of giving back. So I'm very honored. And the president today is doing the same thing with the VA Mission Act, that we could go to our own doctor and not have to wait in line at the VA. So I'm very grateful to the president for what he did. I'm one of the fortunate ones, I guess, because I am so grateful to be alive. When I look at that American flag, it gives me the freedom that I have. As a matter of fact, I have an American flag and a Trump flag flying in front of my home so that I can brag about it, because I am so proud to be an American, and I'm so proud to have him as my president. People who give of their life for other people, they're heroes. President Trump is giving people hope. So I'm a firm believer in what he's doing, and I pray to God every single day to keep him happy and healthy and to get him reelected. If I can convince anybody at all to vote for Donald Trump, it'll be a blessing.